On the coldest night of the year, when the streets had emptied and frost claimed the air like quiet fire, I had no plans to leave my apartment. I remember standing by the window, watching the snow fall like ashes from the sky, soft, endless, burying everything in white silence. But just past midnight, a sound pierced through it all. A scream, thin, desperate, then gone. I don't know what made me run outside without even grabbing a coat. Maybe instinct, maybe fate, maybe something else. The scream came from the alley behind my building, where the snow was deeper, untouched. I expected nothing. Maybe a stray cat, maybe wine playing tricks. But instead, under the dim yellow streetlight, was a little girl, maybe 6 years old, barefoot, shivering, eyes wide with terror. She didn't speak at first, just looked up at me with a stare that went straight to my bones. Her lips were blue, her fingers stiff. I didn't ask questions. I picked her up and carried her inside, wrapped her in every blanket I had, set the heater on full, and made her a cup of warm water because I had no milk. No cocoa, nothing sweet. It wasn't until she was settled, sitting small and quiet on my couch, that I asked, "Where's your family?" She said nothing, not a word, just a slow shake of the head and eyes that never blinked. I called the police, told them I found a child abandoned in the snow. They said they'd send someone, but storms had delayed everything. Roads were closed, responders slow. It would be a few hours, they said, maybe longer. So it was just me and her, in the quiet, the heater humming, the clock ticking. She didn't move much, barely looked away from the wall. But then, as the hours passed, she began to speak, not in full stories, but in pieces. She said her name was Lila, that someone had told her to wait in the alley, that it was supposed to be a game. She said, "Mommy was crying when she left." That single sentence chilled me more than the snow ever could. I tried asking more, gently, but she just curled into herself and didn't respond. I didn't press. I didn't want to scare her. Eventually, she fell asleep on the couch, her little frame wrapped in blankets too big, hands finally warm. I stayed up all night watching her, heart racing, afraid she'd disappear if I blinked. By morning, the snow had calmed, and I waited for the police to arrive, sipping cold coffee. Still unsure if any of this was real, they showed up around 9. 2 officers, kind-faced but cautious. When I told them what happened, they went still. "We've been searching for a girl matching her description since last night," one of them said. "But the thing is, she's not missing. She was found dead at 11 p.m. in the same alley you say you pulled her from." I couldn't speak. I turned to point to the couch, but it was empty. No blankets, no cup, no warmth, only the faint outline where someone might have sat. I stood frozen in place, unable to form a single word, my breath caught in my throat as the officers exchanged glances. One of them stepped further into the room, glancing around quietly as if expecting to find the little girl hiding somewhere under the furniture behind the curtains, but I already knew they wouldn't find her because I couldn't feel her anymore. The air that had once felt alive with her silent presence was now hollow, empty. I kept repeating she was here over and over, like if I said it enough, it would make it true she was here. She slept on that couch. I wrapped her in blankets. I made her warm water. I heard her speak. Her name was Lila. She told me about her mother. I watched her shiver. I felt her hands. They were so cold, so real. The younger officer gently asked me to sit down, his tone not accusatory but cautious, as if I might break. I sat because my legs were trembling, because nothing felt real anymore. He asked what time I found her, where exactly in the alley. I had seen her, and I answered everything clearly. I remembered every detail, the way the snow had crunched beneath my feet, the flickering streetlight, the sound of her breathing. I didn't imagine that I couldn't have. The older officer left the apartment to check the alley. The younger stayed with me. He asked if I'd experienced any recent trauma, if I'd been under stress, if I lived alone. I nodded to all of it. I told him my husband had died 2 winters ago in the same storm that brought Lila to me. I'd been alone ever since, no family, no close friends, just the silence of the apartment and the world outside buried in snow. When the older officer returned, his boots wet with slush, he said there were no signs of footprints in the alley. No disturbance, no indication anyone had been there in hours. The snow was smooth, untouched, but I remembered carrying her through it, remembered my own footprints and hers. There had to be something. They left eventually, promising to follow up, but I could see it in their eyes. They didn't believe me. Not really. I was just the lonely widow with grief playing tricks on her mind, maybe. I had dreamed it all, but how do you dream a heartbeat? A whisper, the feel of someone's weight in your arms. I walked back to the couch where she had slept and sat there, hands shaking, heart heavy. I thought maybe I was losing my mind, maybe all the loneliness had finally broken me, but when I looked down, something caught my eye. Wedged between the cushions was a tiny thread of pink yarn. I reached for it and pulled it free. It was a piece of a child's mitten, small, delicate, covered in a tiny snowflake pattern. I clutched it in my fist and cried, not out of fear but confusion, because if she wasn't real, how did she leave something behind? That night I couldn't sleep. The apartment felt different again, like something had been stirred, like a door had been opened that shouldn't have been. The wind howled. Louder, the walls creaked and groaned, and I swore. I heard footsteps soft barely there outside my bedroom. I got up heart pounding and found myself walking toward the front door. I didn't know why. Maybe I thought she was back. Maybe I hoped she would be, but when I opened the door, nothing was there, just snow and silence, until I looked down and saw footprints, small, barefoot, leading away from my door. The footprints in the snow were unmistakable, too small to belong to an adult, and they were fresh, unblurred. By winter time, they trailed away from my doorstep into the darkness. Like a quiet cry for help that hadn't been heard in time, my breath caught, and I stepped out barefoot too without thinking, because if she was out there again, if Lila had come back or never left, I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't risk losing her again. Each step stung the cold, cutting through my feet like broken glass, but I kept going, following the trail as it weaved between buildings, past flickering lamps and snow-covered cars, until it stopped abruptly at the edge of an alley, the same one where I'd first seen her. My heart pounded as I turned into it, hoping, praying, dreading. But the alley was empty again, except for a small object resting on the snow, a worn leather button, the kind you'd find on a child's coat, the same coat she'd worn when I found her. I bent to pick it up, hands trembling, staring at it like it would explain everything. Didn't it just raise more questions? I didn't sleep that night again. I just sat in the living room, the button and the mitten beside me, like evidence in a case no one else believed in. But me, and maybe some part of me, didn't believe it either, maybe. I was just unraveling quietly without knowing it, but then why did the pain in my chest feel so real, so sharp, like grief with no name? The next morning I got a call. It was from a woman. I didn't know her voice was shaking. She said she found my number scribbled on a piece of paper in her daughter's coat pocket. I didn't understand at first and asked her to repeat herself. Her name was Dana. She said her daughter had been missing for 2 nights. She had filed a report, but no one had seen her, not even a trace, until that morning. She said her daughter came home just before sunrise, barefoot, cold, confused, and clutching a pink mitten. I froze, unable to speak, as tears welled in my eyes. Dana asked me if I had seen her daughter, if I had helped her, if I knew why she kept saying my name in her sleep. Her daughter's name was Lila. I asked her to come over. I needed to see her. I needed to believe that she was real, not a ghost, not a dream. Dana hesitated, but agreed. An hour later, they were at my door, and the moment I saw her, everything inside me broke. Lila ran to me, arms wrapping around my legs as if she'd known me forever. She looked up with the same wide eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Dana looked as shocked as I felt, and when I told her about that freezing night, about the couch, the tea, the warmth, she began to cry too. She said Lila had been gone for 2 days with no memory of where she'd been, no marks, no harm, but something had changed in her. She was softer, quieter, like she'd seen something no child should. We sat for hours trying to piece things together, but nothing made perfect sense. How did Lila find her way to me? Why did she write my name? Why did she return to the alley? Why did she vanish again? But one thing was clear. Whatever happened that night, I hadn't imagined it. I had saved her. And somehow, she had saved me too. That night after Dana and Lila left, I stood by the window watching the snowfall quietly cover the street again, like a fresh canvas, as if the last few days had never happened, but I knew better. I could still feel her little arms around me, still hear the way she whispered, "Thank you," like it carried more weight than just gratitude, like it meant something deeper, something neither of us could name. I barely slept again. This time not because of fear, but because my mind was racing, looping through every detail of the last few days, trying to stitch together the cracks in the story that didn't fit. Where had Lila really been during those 2 days? Why had she found her way to my doorstep? What had happened between the moment she vanished and the moment she returned to her mother? By morning, I couldn't take the uncertainty anymore. I needed answers. I called Dana and asked if I could come over, if we could talk more, if maybe Lila would remember something new. She agreed, but her voice was laced with hesitation. She said Lila had barely spoken since they got home, only curled up in her room, clutching the mitten like it was her only anchor. I arrived with a bag of pastries and trembling hands. Lila's house was small, cozy, filled with warmth and photos and colors. That made my own place feel hollow. We sat in the living room while Dana tried gently coaxing Lila to talk, but she only peeked at me from behind her mother. His arm then slowly reached into her pocket and handed me a folded piece of paper. It was a drawing. A child's drawing, rough and messy, but clear enough to make my blood freeze. It was me standing beside a fire with Lila wrapped in a blanket, and in the corner was a dark shape, tall, watching a shape with no face, just eyes, wide and white, drawn over and over again, like Lila had been trying to erase them but couldn't. Dana looked at it and went pale. She said Lila had been having nightmares drawing that same shape every night since she came back. She said she'd tried burning one of the drawings, but Lila had cried, screamed until she got it back. I asked Lila quietly where she saw that shape, and she whispered the alley, her voice barely a breath. Then she pointed to the window and said, "He doesn't like warm places." Dana and I exchanged a look neither of us could explain what was happening, but it wasn't just trauma. There was something else, something colder. We decided to take her to a child psychologist, someone who could help make sense of the drawings. the nightmares, the fear, but as we were leaving, Lila tugged on my sleeve and said one last thing that sent chills down my spine. He followed me to your house, but he couldn't come inside. That night, I dug out the old books my grandmother used to keep stories of spirits. Folklore, protection symbols, things. I used to roll my eyes at now I read them like they held the only truth left in the world. I didn't know what I believed, but I knew this wasn't just a lost girl and a kind stranger anymore. This was something darker, and I had been marked by it, just like she had. The next few days blurred into a strange rhythm of fear, curiosity, and a deep, unspoken connection between me and Lila. I kept my distance, but I couldn't stop checking in on Dana, calling just to ask how things were, but always hoping Lila might say something, anything that would help me understand what I had brought into my life. Then one evening, Dana called me, her voice low and trembling. She said she had gone into Lila's room to check on her and found the girl sitting up wide awake, staring at the wall. When Dana asked what was wrong, Lila simply pointed and said he was here again. This time I didn't hesitate. I drove to their house in the middle of the night, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. Dana let me in, eyes rimmed with red. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, and Lila was sitting on the couch holding the same drawing from before, the figure, now drawn even larger, taking up almost the whole page. I sat down across from her and asked gently what he wanted. She looked at me, then at her mother, then back at me and said softly, "He's waiting for someone to open the door again. He doesn't knock, he just waits." Dana clutched Lila close, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. The room suddenly felt cold, like all the warmth had been pulled out of it, like something was just beyond our reach watching. The next day, we took Lila to the child psychologist. She was sweet, calm, and kind, but even she seemed unnerved by Lila's story. She said the drawings were consistent with a child who had experienced extreme fear, but also that there was a pattern not common in most trauma cases, repeating symbols, specific phrases that sounded more like memory than imagination. She said children don't invent this kind of consistency unless they've seen something real. We started doing research, digging into missing persons, reports around the area from that same night, and to our shock, we found something 2 years ago. A woman had reported her daughter missing, same age, same height and hair color, but the case had been closed days later when the girl was found wandering into a nearby town unharmed but unresponsive. The girl wouldn't speak for weeks, and when she finally did, she told her parents she'd been following a shadow that kept whispering, "Come play with me." My heart dropped. It sounded too familiar. We found the parents and reached out anonymously. I asked if their daughter ever talked about a faceless figure or warm places, and the mother gasped. She said her daughter still sleeps with every light on and refuses to go near fireplaces. It wasn't just Lila. There were others. Dana and I sat that night trying to piece everything together, as if by naming it we could make it lose its power, but all we knew was this: whatever Lila saw, whatever found her that night in the snow, it wasn't done. And maybe it never would be. Just before I left, Dana looked at me and said, "I think she was sent to you for a reason. Not just because you were kind. Not just because you opened the door, but because somehow you already knew how to keep her safe." The words rattled inside me and stayed long after I drove home and locked every door. Because deep down I knew she was right. And that meant it wasn't over yet. That night, as I lay in bed, I kept replaying Dana's words over and over in my head, "sent to me for a reason." It sounded dramatic, too big to be true, but I couldn't ignore the way things had unfolded, the way Lila found her way to my doorstep on the coldest night of the year, like she knew I would open the door, like she was meant to choose this path. But what haunted me most wasn't the mystery of how she got to me. It was the feeling that something had followed her, that faceless thing in her drawings, the shadow in her stories. It felt close, and I could no longer pretend it was just a product of fear or imagination. The next morning, Dana called again. Her voice was frantic. She said Lila had vanished right from her room. The window was still locked, the door untouched, but her bed was empty. Her shoes were still by the door, and her coat still hung in the closet. I raced over to Dana's house, the air around it already feeling heavy, like the calm before a storm. Dana was sobbing, pacing, calling Lila's name over and over. Then I saw it, a drawing lying on the floor in the hallway outside. Her bedroom, this one was different. It was of me. Lila had drawn me standing in the snow with the door open, and behind me in the shadows was the same faceless figure, but this time it wasn't just watching. It had one hand on my shoulder. I dropped the drawing and backed away, panic rising fast and wild in my chest. I didn't understand what it meant, but something inside me whispered that this was never about saving Lila. This was about choosing, and now it was my turn. Just then I heard a noise from the basement, a soft scraping, like something dragging across the floor. Dana and I stared at each other, breath frozen. We crept down together, each step a scream in my ears, and as we reached the bottom, the air shifted. It felt thick, suffocating, and cold. There in the corner, standing perfectly still, was Lila. She turned slowly to face us, her eyes calm and distant, and she said, "I told him he couldn't have me. I told him he had to wait." I fell to my knees, overcome by relief and confusion. Dana rushed to hold her, but Lila gently pulled back. "He wants you now," she whispered. I didn't understand, but Lila stepped forward, took my hand, and said, "You were kind. You opened the door when no one else would. You gave him a chance to feel something human again." Then she pressed something into my palm. It was a locket I didn't recognize. When I opened it, there was a picture of a little girl from decades ago, and next to it a man with kind eyes and a hollow sadness in his smile. Lila said softly, "He was lost long before he found me, and now he just wants to rest." She looked behind me, nodded once, and said goodbye. The cold vanished. The air warmed, and something deep in my chest released like a thread untangling. Lila blinked and smiled like a weight had lifted. We never spoke of that night again. Lila returned to herself, slowly growing brighter, more present. Dana and I watched as the fear faded from her eyes, replaced by something quieter, something peaceful. A few months later, Dana and Lila moved away to a quiet town far from the snow-covered streets where our story began. We still talk sometimes. Lila sends drawings now filled with color, laughter, sunshine. Never again the shadows. As for me, I kept the locket, not because I needed proof, but because some part of me knows he finally found his way home.